everybody. This is Rabbi Kolakowski, and we're answering more questions from Quora. So today's question says, did they eat the meat from the burnt offerings and thank offerings I'm just going to quote here what it says in the Old Testament. Of course, Jews don't call it Old Testament, that's just what Christians would call the Hebrew Bible, and some Christians add more books to their Old Testament also. Truth is, even by the time of the books that Christians call the New Testament, during much of that time there were still sacrifices being offered in the temple. So it's all throughout, not all throughout biblical time, but throughout the time of the Bible, when either there was a tabernacle or one of the two temples standing, sacrifices were brought. Either before the temple stood, sacrifices could legally be brought either in the tabernacle or certain sacrifices on private altars. And once the temple was brought, according to the law, sacrifices can only be brought in the temple. However, throughout most of the time of the first temple period, people were sinning and offering sacrifices on private altars, not only in the temple. In the Second Temple era, there were not sacrifices outside the temple, except possibly in the Temple of Onias in Egypt, although some say that no sacrifices were actually brought there either. There are different opinions, but most historians would say that there were sacrifices brought in the Temple of Onias in Egypt during the time of the Second Temple in Alexandria. In any event, the main question is about what was done with the sacrifices. Was the meat eaten? And here, the person asking the question is asking specifically about the burnt offerings and the thank offerings. So basically there were four general categories, really three general categories of sacrifices. There were burnt offerings, there were peace offerings, which would include the thank offerings, and there were sin offerings, which would include also the guilt offerings. And among those three types of sacrifices, there were two types of sacrifices. There were public sacrifices, which were on behalf of the entire community, and then there were private sacrifices that individuals would offer for these various reasons. And basically, the main difference between the burnt offerings and all the other offerings is that no part of the burnt offering was eaten. The Hebrew word for the burnt offering actually is olah, which means that which goes up. Just something that is totally burnt and goes up, not something that was eaten. The other offerings, the sin offerings and the peace offerings, were eaten. The sin offerings were only eaten by the priests, and the peace offerings, which included the thank offerings, were eaten either by the people offering them or by the priests. Actually were shared. The burnt offerings, the meat was entirely burnt, but the skins could be taken by the priests for leather. So that's basically the answer that we have here. The burnt offerings were not eaten, and all of the other offerings were eaten by someone, either by the person bringing the sacrifice together with the priests. Certain parts were given to the priests, and certain parts were eaten by the owner. It still had to be eaten in Jerusalem. And so the Paschal sacrifice, for example, would be an example of a peace offering. But additionally to the Passover sacrifice, people would bring other animals to eat during their Passover meal. And those would also be sacrificial meats that were eaten. And then the sin offerings were only eaten by the priests, and not, and that includes both sin offerings and guilt offerings, and they were not eaten by the person who was offering the sacrifice, but rather by the priests. And that's pretty much the answer there. So it's a good question and a very simple answer. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and we hope to see you later.